Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank all of you. I just wanted to say that I think one of the challenges, Mr. Francis, you referenced this in your testimony, is here we sit here today, billions of dollars of overrun, and people are very frustrated by it. And you cited also that the JSF program, the F-22, the Littoral Combat Ship, they were actually worse, and that this is a typical acquisition outcome. So here's the challenge. We've got to change this dynamic, because we've had the leaders of all of our military rightly come in here and testify about the impact of sequestration and the fact that we're going to diminish the size of our fleet, that we need more ships, more attack submarines, more ground troops, obviously more fighters, and making sure that we also have the training, of course, for our men and women in uniform. And then my constituents look at these billions of dollars of overruns that have been multiple examples of it, and look at us and say, why aren't you dealing with that? If we're going to give you more money, then we need you to deal with that. So all of us who care very deeply about making sure that we do what needs to be done to defend this great nation, this is an issue that it's got to go from being the bottom priority to a top priority. So one question I'd ask all of you, whoever's the best, Secretary Stackley, Secretary Farland, if you're Mr. Francis, whoever's best to answer this. You mentioned aligning responsibility, accountability, and decision-making. How are we rewarding good acquisition behavior within the Pentagon? In other words, if you are doing a good job, how are you rewarded? And in turn, I think one of the questions you're hearing from all of us is, how are those being held accountable, not just at the captain level that we've heard about today, but at the highest levels, that this has to be a priority for all of us if we want to make sure that our men and women in uniform have what they need, and that we can make this case to the American people about how important this is. So whoever is best to field that, but I think that's the big question here. We're clearly not aligned in accountability, priority, and how we're rewarding the people who are doing a good job, and also holding accountable the people who aren't doing a good job. And I'm sure that's demoralizing to the people who are doing a good job.
Senator, I think your points are very well made. I'm not sure we reward our program managers very well. I think the only thing that I could see from my experience is you promote them. In terms of holding folks accountable, when we see a clear connection between what they did and their outcome, we do retire them or move them, both civilian and military. Beyond that, the incentive structure that you're referring to is not clear, and it's not adequate, and it ties to what the earlier chairman and the ranking member talked about, is where those decisions are made, and what Paul talked about in terms of how is it that the culture and how the decisions are directed into a program manager relates to their ability to perform.
Well, one thing I would say is that also as leaders, if you've got someone you've got to let go at the captain level, the leader needs to be held accountable also, because any one of us, if our team does something, we're ultimately responsible, right, as the leaders. And I think that coming from the top is so critical of making this a priority. I had a specific question also about what Senator McCain referenced, Mr. Francis, mentioning the KC-46 program and how the contractor has absorbed the cost overruns. Wouldn't it make sense for all major defense acquisition production programs to be designed so that the contractor absorbs the cost overruns for production?
If I could, Senator?
Yes.
I think it's important to understand the risks. Sometimes the threat drives us to take risks because we need to. And when the risks aren't clear, that cost sharing between us and the contractor has to be considered. When we ask for a fixed price contract, when the risks are high, the contractor, in order to get their corporate headquarters to agree upon working in that contract. They add that risk related to costs.
So I understand that issue with regard to R&D, but what I'm talking about is production costs.
I agree with you in production.
So are we doing that consistently across the board on production?
We took a look at our contracts across all the enterprise, across the services, and indeed, yes.
Let me make one point regarding that. And we talked about shipbuilding, the lead shipping, a prototype. Historically, the lead ship of a new class has been a cost-plus ship, with the follow ships being production. Over the last, frankly, since I've been in this office, we've been trying to drive down the number of cost-plus ships in our program. And today, across the Department of the Navy, we have 2 cost-plus ships in production. One of those is the CVN 78.
My time is up, but I also will submit a question for the record that concerns me. As we looked at the CVN 78 cost growth, I'd like to understand, as we look at the Ohio-class submarine replacement program, what lessons we've learned from this so that we don't go down the same road with the Ohio-class, which is obviously very important to our nation. So I'll submit that for the record. Thank you all.
Senator, can I jump in on the time you don't have left?
Of course. With the chairman's latitude. How's that?
Thank you. You're right on production contracts. They should be fixed price. But there's still times, ships aside, there's still some contracts that are cost plus going into low rate production. And you do have to match the risks you're taking with the contract. So a good contract can't save a bad program. So if the risks are high, I don't necessarily fault the contract type. I raise the question, why are we going into production if we're not done with development yet?
Well, if it's a bad program, we shouldn't be investing in it in the first place. Isn't that the fundamental question?
Yes, or if it's just not ready to take the next step. And then on your first point on program managers and people held accountable, I think it's a really good philosophical question about accountable for what? What constitutes success? So if I'm a program manager and I'm trying to get my program through the next milestone, and I do that, and then there's a cost increase, what am I going to be rated on? Getting it through the next milestone or the cost increase? And it's going to be the former. If you can support the program and get it moving, that's what you're mainly accountable for.
Well, that's a problem, because if it costs you a lot more and you're putting it through, but you get it on time, that's not meeting your target. And so people need to be held accountable for both. Otherwise, this is where we end up with the billions of dollars in overruns. Thank you.